Hi, so I want to give my initial reactions to Sunak versus Truss because that's what it comes down to. The results were, I should really have this in front of me. Let's see, I'll get it at the end. But yeah, Sunak versus Truss. I'm not overly surprised by that. There was some reports last night saying Truss would pull through, that Kemi Badenoch supporters would go to her. So it's not overly surprising, and it was always going to be very close between her and Penny Mordaunt. Um, but of course, Penny Mordaunt's going to be very disappointed. There's a human side to that, as all the candidates would be. That was very close. Of course, it's still not over. In the end, either Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss are going to be very disappointed. But there's a few things to bear in mind with this. It's not the wider public that's voting. And I keep making this point that we never directly elect prime ministers. The ruling party, which is the Conservatives, they won the 2019 general election, have the right to choose their own leader. Um, but what I would say to Tory members, if anyone watching this is a member of the Conservative Party, please think you're not just voting for your leader, you're voting for the future Prime Minister, the 56th Prime Minister of this country. So it's in everyone's interest that they make the right choice. Um, Now, I'm not a member of the Conservative Party. There's a lot of areas I differ with the Conservative Party on, but I'm far from swayed by Keir Starmer's Labour. And right now, I describe myself as an observant voter. Let me put it that way, an observant voter. There's a lot of Tory positions that I like. I like their attitude to national defence. I like their pushback against woke ideology. But and this is a big but, and it's where Labour could gain ground. Um, they have to understand the perception that the public have of this kind of elitism. Now, I'm not talking about elitism in terms of what school they went to or their economic background. I'm talking about this kind of bubble whereby we had a prime minister who broke his own laws, and I'm not sure if the Tories still quite grasp this. I mean, those mass resignations, were they really about Partygate, or was it just kind of Sunak and Javid, you know, toppled the dominoes? I wonder how much conviction there really was there. Rishi Sunak, he was asked about this and he said, In the end, I felt I had no choice." Well, why did he wait so long? Now, Liz Truss never resigned. She's made the point that her job as Foreign Secretary, that's her responsibility, and it would be irresponsible to resign. Maybe she has a point. Maybe it would be wrong for the Foreign Secretary, and Tim Wallace, as Defence Secretary, said the same thing, to resign at this time when Russia is increasing its brutality in Ukraine and continuing to pose a threat to this continent. We have a rising China. Um, I think that will certainly go in her favour with Johnson supporters, and it could go against Rishi Sunak. I mean, it could be seen that he has been opportunistic in a way that Truss hasn't. Nevertheless, she is running. I think it would be a mistake if this campaign got very, because now it's going to be this head to head for the next month. It's quite a prolonged period. I think it would be a mistake for the Tories if it got really ugly and really personal. I hope that doesn't happen because it would be bad for their party and it would be bad for the country, actually. I don't think Labour should be triumphant about that because I think generally, people want cleaner politics. So I hope it's a clean campaign. I hope they just focus on the policies and that's it, and it doesn't get into personal attacks. Um, some of Penny Mordaunt's supporters were arguing that that was happening. I'm not really sure that that was the case. I think the criticism was more of her politics, of her policies, rather than the personal. I mean, a contest by nature, you're going to lay out differences. But I'm interested in history, and I look at history. 1951 to 1964, we had four Conservative prime ministers in a row. Winston Churchill in his second term, second administration, Anthony Eden, Harold Macmillan, and Sir Alec Douglas Home. Um, Four prime ministers, 13 years. We've now had 12 years of Conservative government. We're going to go into the fourth Conservative Prime Minister. Labour could talk about an immediate general election. It's not going to happen. We're going to have a fourth Conservative Prime Minister in a row. That Prime Minister, whether it's Sunak or Truss, could be a very short term Prime Minister if Labour win the 2024 general election. If that's the case, we will have had, four Prime Ministers in less than 10 years, if my maths is correct. Um, so it's this revolving door, and that I don't think that's good for democracy. I mean, if you look at countries like Italy and Japan, the Japanese situation may actually change with what's happened to Shinzo Abe. There is what's happening there. Fumio Kishida's party could actually be bolstered by the martyrdom of Abe. That sometimes happens in politics. But look at Italy; it's like a revolving door of prime ministers. I don't think that would be good for the UK, and I hope it doesn't happen. Um, because a country needs a sense of stability and a sense of certainly not consistency if it's on the wrong course, but at least stability. And one of the great things about this country is we've always had a peaceful transfer of power. It's something we take for granted, actually. Not many countries can say that, but the United Kingdom has. We've had a peaceful transfer of power basically for 300 years, since Walpole. Sure, some elections have been dirty, there's been corruption, but we have never had a violent general election, really, um, in 300 years. So that's something that we should value. Um, I'm just going to say a few things for now because no doubt a lot more will come through in the next month. I'm not endorsing either of them. Like I say, I'm not a member of the Conservative Party. There will be certain areas I take issue with. I think if they want to retain red wall votes, though, they need to take bold stances. They need to take on these big energy companies. They need to really prove that they understand people who are struggling. I think some people will be disappointed in Mordaunt is out because she was sort of pitching herself as the last outsider. Truss and Sunak, of course, were heavyweights in the Johnson administration, Chancellor and Foreign Secretary. I think they're going to both have to prove that they're not just establishment figures. And it's kind of this balancing act because they have to show we're experienced and we've proven experience, but we're also outsiders. Now, you can't have it both ways. So that's a bit of a challenge. How do they show that they are experienced? They both are, but they're also not in this bubble, this kind of Johnstonian bubble. I think that will be their big challenge to pitch to the wider public because it's fine getting the Tory membership, but they have to be thinking long term. How do they win? How do they win the general election? And I think the Tories run the risk of just seeing this as an internal thing. Now, Keir Starmer and his party, if they're sensible, they'll be exploiting. I mentioned earlier, dirty politics isn't good for anyone, but politically it would be smart of Starmer and Ryan there to exploit any differences and to show that they're the party of government. I've got big reservations about Starmer's Labour Party, but it all depends on what sort of direction Prime Minister Truss or Prime Minister Sunak take. Either way, it's going to be significant. In Rishi Sunak, we'll have our first British Asian Prime Minister, our first ethnic minority Prime Minister, and one of our youngest, actually. He's only 42, and it's a very fast rise. The guy only became an MP in 2015. I mean, no one could doubt Rishi Sunak is a clever political operator in that sense. But perhaps that's also his Achilles heel. There's something a little bit too polished about Sunak. I mean, he's constantly Mr. Calm, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but there is echoes there of Tony Blair and David Cameron, and it's a little bit. What I want to know of Rishi Sunak, what makes him angry, what moves him, um, because there's something a little bit too polished about the guy, almost like he's reading a teleprompter. Like what moves him now as chancellor? Because we look at the records, as chancellor, I think he handled the pandemic pretty well. I mean, his support for businesses is that deserves merit. I remember, going to Weatherspoons in Newcastle. It was a rainy night in 2020. I remember the Rishi specials or Sunak specials, and at that time Sunak was very popular, and with good reason. He was giving support during the pandemic. I think he handled that pretty well. Um, But now, is he really in touch with this cost of living crisis as Chancellor? That's something that maybe Liz Truss will exploit. Now, her record as Foreign Secretary, I think, has been quite good. She has secured trade deals with Australia, with Japan. She's taken a very tough line with Russia. Um, China, yes. I would like to see them both be more outspoken on China. I mean, Penny Mordaunt showed her credentials there with her stance. That's one of my biggest concerns about Sunak. I think he's too cautious with China. It's all very well sort of vaguely saying, well, we'll raise these issues. And I want to see a prime minister who is boldly saying what China's doing is unacceptable, and I'm going to, as prime minister of the United Kingdom, stand up to this. I just think Sunak is too cautious. With ambitious Tory women, there's always this cliche of the next Iron Lady. I mean, it was used when Theresa May came in. It's been used for Priti Patel. It's now going to inevitably be used for Liz Truss. Truss is well known to be an admirer of Thatcher. The interesting thing, though, about Liz Truss is she was not always a Tory. She came from quite a left wing background. In fact, back in the 80s, unless I'm mistaken, she was anti Thatcher. So her evolution has been interesting. Um, but that will pitch to Tory voters. I'm not sure if it will necessarily pitch to the wider public. So yeah, we know now it's going to be Prime Minister Sunak or Prime Minister Truss. What I would like to see is basically the things I laid out last night. Um, I do feel that I was warming to Penny Mordaunt. I think she was offering some things, and I definitely think Kemi Badenoch and Tom Tugendhat had some strong positions. I think the next prime minister would do well to have some of those people in their cabinet. Um, those are talented people, and I think that Labour right now are being quite smug, and they're saying, "Oh, this is a dying ship," and all the Tories are, fighting among themselves. Well, Labour shouldn't be too complacent because there's people like me who loathe identity politics and loathe the sort of divisiveness that comes from woke ideology. Labour is not shackling itself from that, unshackling itself from that, rather. When I remember Keir Starmer taking the knee, the Tories didn't. They don't pander to that, and I think that's a strength. Um, whereas the Labour Party define people by race, the Tories focus on meritocracy. Although you could argue there's a lack of merit with some candidates. But my point is, right now, honestly, if it's between Labour and the Tories, if I'm voting today, honestly, I'm slightly veering towards the Tories, but only slightly, only slightly. I there are areas that I definitely am uneasy about with the Tories. I do think there is a bit of an elitist mindset of one rule for us and another rule for them. They need to address that. Um, Both Truss and Sunak were loyal to Johnson up to the end. Truss is going to have to address that. Why is she so reluctant to criticise Boris Johnson? That's a problem. And that could really lose red wall votes, ironically, because it was Johnson that got the red wall votes in the first place. But then I think he has destroyed them with his antics, with his lying, with his basic contempt for Parliament, and by extension for the wider public. It's this kind of flippant, blasé attitude he takes to a serious role. I mean, the whole Johnson the clown image, it worked for a while, but at this point, I think it's no longer a joke. Um, because his office isn't a joke. Really, it's not. Johnson will have some things that he can look to that and be proud of. He was robust in his defense of Ukraine. He deserves credit for that. The vaccine rollout deserves credit for that, as does the health minister. Who was it? Javid. Yeah. No, it wasn't Javid. I'm getting that wrong. Who was it rolled out? My mind's frozen. It'll come to me. It was one of those ambitious stories. It was either Javid Sahawi, certainly wasn't Hancock, but Yeah, I think the vaccine rollout, that will be another thing that it could look to. So I don't say the Johnson administration was a total disaster. I think he got some things right. But I think the sleaze and I think the dishonesty, and the way the Tories trivialized that was disgraceful. Um, anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. But you might loathe the Tories and you might think, oh God, hope neither of them get in. But I would say Labour need to prove a lot of things to me, at least, before I would vote for them. My local MP is okay. I don't. I think she's an okay MP. She's done some good things for Sunderland. I'm talking about Julie Elliott. Um, I like the fact that she stood on the committee against reality TV. Um, but I vote for a range of reasons. I vote for the candidate. I vote for the party, and the leadership matters. So there's a lot of factors I look at. Anyway, let me know what your thoughts are on where do you live in the country? Is it Tory country? Is it Labour country? Is it Lib Dem country? Um, but there will be a lot more to say about the subject. That's it. Sunak versus Truss. I think they would both do well to not polarize more than Tugendhat and Badenoch, because I think all three of those people had some merit, and I think that they would do well to reconcile at this point, especially Truss and Mordaunt. That got quite testy, so I think they would do well to reconcile. But and if it could happen over the next month, maybe things will come out about either candidate that I think, oh, that's appalling. But at the moment, I would say they both have records which are quite good, actually. I don't think either of them have terrible records, but I do think for Sunak, two things. He has to be more hardline on China, and he has to be more in touch with the cost of living crisis. And for Truss, she needs to prove that she's not just Johnson Part 2, because she seems very reluctant to criticise Boris Johnson, and I get it. He promoted her, he gave her a job, but she has to show that there is genuine public anger about that. In terms of national defence, I trust Truss. I do think she's showing that she's hardline on Russia and China, so I'm quite confident that she will continue to be so if she were Prime Minister. Let me know your thoughts. Sunak or Truss?